Hello Internet, I'm the Disney Brain, and today we're finally taking a closer look at the Saban Disney halfway house known as Wild Force. This represents a unique point for me personally for one significant reason. While seasons like RPM, s.p.d, and Time Force only get better with a closer inspection, Wild Force ended up going a bit backwards when I took that same analytical look at it to make this video. That's not to say that Wild Force is a poor season, far from it, but it also isn't as great as it could have been, or as good as I used to think it was. And before anyone goes there, no, it has nothing to do with Rick Medina's arrest, although that obviously doesn't help. We'll get into that in part 2, but for now, let's kick things off by taking a closer look at the season premiere, Lionheart. So, in the first episode, a couple of interesting things are established immediately. Firstly, we learn that Cole's tribe isn't where he's really from, which now sends him on a quest to find his destiny, and he can also talk to animals and essentially communicate with anything that has a heart. Secondly, the Wild Force Rangers have been operating for at least a year now, ever since Taylor first became a recruit. So, after Cole does a few Cole things in a quest to find his parent/destiny, the current Wild Force Rangers recruit him, or, in Queen Taylor terms, draft him. Cole's introduction does a good enough job at giving us an audience POV of what the Animarium is all about, as well as what the objective is this go around. And the Wild Zords being alive as opposed to just being fighting machines is a great detail. This season places a heavy emphasis on nature, life, and the value thereof, so it wouldn't make as much sense to have them just be animal robots. To really bring that point home, the Lion Zord even gets sick later on, to say nothing of the Deer Zord's initial attitude. Unlike the Galactabeasts, who could take care of themselves most of the time and didn't require as much nurturing, Wild Force does a good job in making several of the very much living Wild Zords seem alive. And it was also smart of them to establish all of that through Cole right off the bat. This grants us the ability to see why he'd be chosen to lead this particular team, even though I don't agree that he should have right away. I'll bring up that point later on when we discuss Taylor in depth, but first, let's talk about the big reveal of episode 2. Yes, Master Org is a prominent reveal, but the most important thing episode 2 informs us of is why the Orgs exist. They exist because human pollution got out of hand, thus turning once inanimate objects into monsters as a direct result. It's an interesting idea for a theme, because it's not something Rangers has paid much attention to. Despite the fact that they often save the planet and even attend peace conferences, there's not an overabundance of discussion or focus on planetary well-being, or what more the Rangers could be doing to ensure the Earth is thriving, as opposed to just ensuring that people aren't being squashed by giant monsters and or giant robots. Megaforce sort of tried to do this maybe, but Gosei and Robonite are also asleep right now when the environment is literally being threatened, so let's just not even go there. However, the entire mythos surrounding the Orgs and this theme gets a little bit murky. I think that's the biggest thing holding back Wild Force as a season, so I'll dig deeper into it now before we discuss the characters and the other major plot points. The first thing to mention is a small detail, but a very relevant one. In episode 2, Cole can't connect to the heart of the barbed wire Org because Orgs have no heart. This completely turns his whole worldview around regarding how to deal with the enemy. Needless to say, Wild Force's version of Plan Xander ain't working here. Except it could have, because of the wonderfully entertaining pair known as Toxica and Jindrax, both of which, especially Jindrax, show plenty of heart and real emotional depth throughout the series. Jindrax had a brother that he genuinely cared about. Toxica experiences true sorrow when she loses her horn, and during the tail end of the series, when Master Org goes full-on Org, they clearly care about each other. What I'm trying to say with all of this is that Orgs, to their benefit, cannot be so easily defined. There's at least 3 kinds of Orgs, if you count the Master as in his own tier, but the season never really allows the Rangers to understand that until the show almost ends, and even then, they barely do. Everyday Orgs are said to be created through pollution, but maybe Duke Orgs were created through something else entirely, something bigger, like war or violence that humans can also be blamed for, therefore justifying their advanced status. But Wild Force never dives deeper into that potential nuance, so I'm not sure there was a point to making that Org hierarchy in the first place. So now let's discuss the broader theme itself, the idea of humanity being its own worst enemy. A vital message, and just like with s.p.d's message, perhaps an even more timely one nowadays than when it first aired. But here's the problem. Wild Force doesn't really do anything with it. There's no angle or character here to point to and say this is symbolic of the cause of the bigger problem. And none of the Rangers here are shown doing much wrong, except for Merrick that one time, or taking their planet for granted. So the org idea never really affects them personally. What we have is a disconnect between the so-called theme and the characters, because the characters aren't written with the theme in mind. Not even Master Org connects to this concept, since his entire origin is based off jealousy and revenge. It was a great backstory, and it does speak to what I believe is the more prominent theme of the value of life, but other than the clear connection to Cole and the more subtle connection to Merrick, it still doesn't connect to anything else happening here on a narrative level. And that's because none of the other Rangers or characters ever have to deal with or overcome similar feelings. Max has the whole kid label he tries to shake off, Danny has to be a little bit tougher, Taylor has to chill out a bit, and Alyssa is ideal as is, so no real change. But nothing any of those characters go through connects to what either of the villain origins pride themselves on being, especially the pollution bit, which brings us to the kid. So Kite is not a well-liked character, just in general, and by extension, Animus is also not a well-liked character. To his credit though, he has a fitting and uniquely ancient design. It's easy to see him as the previous incarnation of the Wild Zords, but more importantly, Kite's whole reason for being is to abrasively remind the Rangers that they suck at protecting the Earth, apparently, so he tests them by taking away the things helping to keep the Earth safe. You're kidding, right? He's kidding, right? What was he expecting the Rangers to do? Start a damn recycling center? No, wait. I know exactly what Kite wants.
By your powers combined, I am Captain Planet!
Captain Planet, he's our hero, gonna take pollution down to zero.
This whole mess speaks to the biggest issue of this season. Kite comes out of nowhere and delivers his asshole test, but there's no foundation for him to stand on. If the Rangers were abusing their powers, as with Mystic Force's Dark Wish, perfect platform for lesson learning, but none of the Rangers ever do that. If they were portrayed as unknowingly harming the Earth through their battles, kind of like the larger point of Marvel's Civil War, then Kite has a point, because that's something all Ranger teams can be accused of. Or, more to the point of this season, if they were portrayed as losing hope because the battles were getting tougher, then Kite has reason to test their resolve. Also a moot point here, since the best friend duo's calling card is never giving up, a phrase their leader clearly agrees with. But Kite never brings up the buildings that have been leveled. Kite never brings up all the countless people caught in the crossfire of battle after battle. Kite never brings up anything that this team could actually be accused of having done, in favor of punishing them for every single balled up newspaper, plastic ring, or uncollected bottle cap on every inch of the freaking planet. If you ever wanted the long form answer of why everyone despises this child, this would be my best attempt at an answer. So I'm forced to ask, what was the point of having the orgs rise from pollution? Answer, there really wasn't one, because before the Kite drama, it's brought up once, and after, it never gets brought up again, and during the Kite drama, most of his actions don't hold up to basic sense. Perfect example, Animus somehow believes the orgs at face value when they say humans caused their rise. He didn't even question it, despite the fact that Animus fought those same orgs 3,000 years ago during the so-called good old days. His angle is humanity is not worth saving, but his perspective is biased towards only the bad stuff he cut on TV. To backtrack to my previous joke, there are actual recycling centers out there. Despite the guilt she felt afterwards, Taylor was completely in the right to chastise Kite for not being well informed. Moments like those give me the sense that his so-called test was disingenuous, when in reality, he was probably just proven wrong. I can't say that for a fact, but I don't think it quite adds up otherwise. And again, there's no angle present in Wild Force that really gets at the heart of this conflict, despite its apparent plot significance, so everything about it falls flat. It's a poorly constructed narrative, but what really helps this season is having a vastly superior one come in the form of Zen Aku. The Zen Aku Arc is a very, very good arc, one of the all-time best build-ups to a 6th Ranger introduction. My only issue was that nobody outside of Merrick himself seemed all that affected by it. I mean, yes, the Rangers do get hurt a lot because of this arc, but nobody really grows through it. mainly because there's no ranger here other than Merrick that needs to sort out his past mistakes. It's a singular problem, but it's also a considerable flaw, since even the Deus Ex Parents Thunderstorm arc at least brought out new sides of Dustin and Tori. But beyond that detail, Merrick's introduction is very well done, and his reluctance to join the team initially makes sense. Merrick is a solid character, but I do wish he could have had a bit more of an old world aura about him, since he is 3,000 plus years old. What's more, we finally get an interesting connection between hero and villain, and the thin line separating the two. We learn that 3,000 years ago, Merrick sought out the wolf mask in an effort to gain power, but the side effects caused him to become Zen Aku, a mostly evil being. Notice that this is very similar to what happened to Dr. Adler. Both him and Merrick loved a girl. Through very different means, neither one of them could properly express those feelings at the time. Then, they both end up with devastating new powers, but at a hefty price. That's a pretty brilliant parallel right there. Almost Jungle Fury level brilliant. Because in both cases, man chose to become Org. One had good intentions, but still regrets his actions and does what he can now to repent. The other feels no such regret, and instead continues to lose his humanity over time. As a result of two very divergent paths, Merrick ends up befriending Zen Aku, so they both end up walking the path together in the end, as equals. Meanwhile, Master Org ends up as a real Org, consumed by his feelings completely, never able to let go of what ailed him in the past, which ultimately costs him his life. It leaves me wishing that Merrick and the Master would have been more connected within the story. It does make more sense to have Cole avenge his parents in a very Harry Potter-like way, but narratively, it would have been interesting to bring more attention to the ways the lone wolf relates to the man that also felt alone for many years. And now that we've already started with Merrick, let's dive into the other characters. My only overarching character issue here goes back to the lacking thematic presence this time around. Because of that, it sort of limits how great some of the characters can be. There's just not any larger reason for them to change who they are or advance as people other than time passes and stuff happens. But even then, most of them simply don't change all that much because they aren't challenged to. That defined a lot of the characters we got in the early Mighty Morphin and Zeo days. Characters that were good, some great, and several that still resonate with us today. Ironically, the first Disney-era season is basically taking inspiration from that. It can work as a way to progress characters, but at times, there's no real progression. Max Cooper is a good example of this. I like Max, more than most fans I'd venture to guess, but he wouldn't be much of a presence without his friendship with Danny. And it's a great pairing too, because Max has the confidence and youthful exuberance, while Danny has none of that. And before Danny came around, Max was the only guy on a team of then 2 other Rangers and 1 Princess. So to me, it makes perfect sense that once he had to leave his old life behind, he'd quickly latch onto the first other guy that joined. He can be a little much sometimes, but the biggest thing for me is that he isn't really challenged. He does seem to kind of mature over time, but he only goes through 1 real hurdle all season. Even acquiring his giraffe sword was only a matter of understanding a vision. It's pretty lazy writing. So despite me liking Max, I don't think the show knew what to do with him, and as a result, there's not a lot to say about him. I don't exactly have pages of script on Danny Delgado either, but I think the season does a little better at utilizing his ironic combination of imposing and nurturing. I don't think Danny makes Max a better character in any direct way, but the reverse is more evident, and it all stems from his trademark expression, never give up. It's as basic as it gets, but it works specifically for Danny, because that's probably what carried him through his early Ranger days. He can be a fighter, but we know that he is first and foremost a lover, so being a Ranger must have been very taxing for him initially. He might have already quit too, if not for his best friend urging him on with a youthful energy that only Max can provide. Danny has several great traits, but one of his best is responsibility. He had his chance to be with the girl of his dreams, but he chose to put Ranger duties first. Even though there's no Zordon here telling the Rangers to not use your position for personal gain, there's this sense that this is what happened here, because even though I don't think this would count as such, perhaps Danny felt that this would be an abuse of Ranger power, because he used that to save Kendall, on top of him not wanting to place her in harm's way, of course. Whether you agree with his logic or not, Danny is one strong man, in every sense of the word, and was a positive addition to this season. Speaking of positive additions, enter Alyssa in Relay, a character I called a role model back in my Pink Rangers video. She doesn't really change or progress all that much, so similar to Danny, it's on Wild Force to present us with the depth that's already there. And if you thought Danny was responsible, you ain't seen nothing yet. Alyssa is as on top of things as any Ranger to ever do it, essentially treating Ranger work like a college internship, while she perfectly sorts through the rest of her life. But, similar to Summer, Wild Force never makes her look too perfect. She can and does do a lot, but none of it feels out of the realm of possibility because of her strong sense of diligence. It makes perfect sense that she's the one to start unraveling the mystery of Cole's family because she's smart, resourceful, caring, and the only Ranger here that would voluntarily go to a library. And where does all this heavily rooted discipline come from? Her father, and the at times overly intense way he trained her. So it also makes perfect sense, given how hard she had to fight just to go to college, that she'd be as organized as humanly possible to take advantage of that chance. And when part 2 drops, we'll discuss Cole Evans, Queen Taylor of course, and a few other important season stories. And yes, this will include the team-up episodes, because I have a fair bit to say on both, especially reinforcements. But until then, thanks for watching.